All right, video for complex fractions. We're getting more and more complicated in the complex fractions that we're going to work on. So let's take a look at simplifying complex fractions. Another example. Complex fraction again is a fraction that contains a fraction in the numerator and or denominator. Here's a fraction in the denominator. Here's a fraction in the numerator. Fraction in the denominator. This is a complex fraction. Here's a complex fraction. So the steps to solve that complex fraction: find out what that lowest common multiple is of all these fractions. That fraction and that fraction is a 1. That fraction and that fraction, that fraction and that fraction. Find out what the lowest common multiple is of those two fractions, or whatever fractions you see in the numerator and denominator. Find out what the lowest common multiple is. Number 2, multiply the numerator and denominator of that complex fraction by that lowest common multiple. And then simplify. So here's an example that we did. We found the lowest common multiple of that fraction, and well, really there's no fraction here, so lowest common multiple was 2. Multiply by 2 over 2, because we're multiplying by 1 here, we're not changing the value of that fraction. And that simplifies the numerator and denominator. And then we just simplify from where I'm pointing to down below and then to the right. Simplify that one to that one to that one. Alright, so let's take a look at a couple more complex stuff. All right, more complex fractions. All right, step number, again, this is my recommendation for following. You can do this method as well if you want, but I think this one is the most direct method of simplifying. So method number 1 is what we follow. Let's, number 1, find out what that lowest common multiple is of all the fractions that are out there. So here's a fraction, here's a fraction, here's a fraction, here's a fraction. So I'm going to take all my fractions and go over here and list all my fractions. I got 1 over x. I got 1 over 2. I got 1 over x squared. I got 1 over 4. And now all of these denominators is what we've got to find our lowest common multiple, or determine our lowest common multiple will be determined by all of these denominators. So we've got to factor all these denominators. That one's factored. That one's factored. That one's factored. And this one, it's not factored yet. We'll call it 2 squared. Now we can find our lowest common multiple. The lowest common multiple of all these fractions includes all the factors. It includes an x. Gotta have a 2. Gotta have an x. It's there already. Gotta have a 2. It's there already. Now we raise each factor to the highest power seen in any of these factors, or any of these fractions, any of these denominators here. X has got to be squared. 2 has to be squared. We'll make it pretty. We'll make it 4x squared. There's our lowest common multiple. All right, so now we've determined our lowest common multiple. Step 2, multiply the numerator and denominator of that complex fraction. Multiply this and this by that lowest common multiple. So let's multiply by 4x squared over 4x squared. Multiplying in red means we're really multiplying by 1, because 4x squared over 4x squared is 1. We're multiplying by 1, so we're not changing the value of that fraction. All we're doing is modifying it. All right, I'm going to put this over here in a box, and I'm going to say that's our way we've found our lowest common multiple. All right, let's multiply my numerator and my denominator. I'm going to call my numerator blue, and I'm going to say, you know what, let's make it a little simpler. I'll call it 4x squared times 1 over x plus 1/2. That's my numerator. My denominator is that times that, so I'll call it 4x squared times 1 over x squared minus 1 over 4. And there's my numerator, there's my denominator. All right, let's multiply my numerator and find out what I've got. 4x squared times 1 over x. 4x squared times 1 over x. We'll call it 4x squared over 1. Gives me 4x squared equals 4x squared over x. X squared with an x cancels out to give me just 4x. That guy goes up here. 4x. My next term is positive times positive, positive. 4x squared times 1/2 really means we're taking the 4 times the 1/2. Half of 4 is 2x squared. There's my numerator. Much simpler than that thing there. Let's take a look at my denominator. 4x squared times 1 over x squared. The x squareds cancel out. We can consider this 4x squared over 1. X squared cancels with x squared to give me just 4. My first term is 4. Second term is positive times negative gives me a negative. 4x squared times 1 over 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. They cancel out, factor out, reduce, and simplify. I've got an x squared. And there's my simplified, I guess next step simplified complex fraction. Because now it's not a complex fraction, it's just got a numerator, it's got a denominator. There's no fractions in the numerator, there's no fractions in the denominator. It's simpler, but now we still got to factor out a numerator and the denominator. So let's take a look. I'm going to move down here. I'm going to say my numerator. Let's see. I would factor out a greatest common factor of 2, and each one also has an x. So I'll call this 2x plus x. Oops, sorry, hang on a second. 2. There we go. Sorry. 2x times 2 gives me 4x. 2x times x gives me 2x squared. That's a good factorization. My denominator becomes, I'm going to factor that. I got a 4 minus x squared. That's a difference of squares. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say, how do I factor out a 4 minus x squared? I'm going to remember how to factor. And I'm going to say 4, I'm going to rewrite as 2 squared minus x as a base squared. And that means my 2, I'm going to get 2 factors here. A 2 goes here, and a 2 goes there. That's a parentheses. X, that's a parentheses also. X goes here, x goes there. 1's minus, 1's plus. And there's my factorization of 4 minus x squared. It's a difference of squares. 2 minus x times 2 plus x. And that is the factorization of 4 minus x squared. This goes here. 2 minus x times 2 plus x. Now the numerator is factored, denominator is factored, and that's just from our factoring chapter. Now we can take a look at 2 plus, any factors that can cancel. So 2 is a factor, x is a factor, 2 plus x is a factor, 2 plus x is a factor down here, and what cancels out? Factors cancel out. 2 plus x divided by 2 plus x is 1. They factor out, cancel, reduce, simplify. And what remains? My numerator is 2x. My denominator is 2 minus x. And remember the entire thing, 2 minus x is a factor. You could think of it as multiplied by 1. 2 minus x would cancel with a 2 minus x up here, but there's no 2 minus x up here. So nothing cancels, factors out, reduces, or simplifies because there are no common factors. And that is our answer.